On Wednesday nights, 8 p.m. Central Standard Time, live on Fishbowl Radio Network and streaming across Instagram, Facebook, and YouTube. See you on Wednesdays. What's up? What's up? What's up? What's up, fam? It's your girl Nick. Hope all is well. How you doing, Tay?
I'm doing all right.
Good. Crazy week.
Not too bad, actually.
Good.
Getting our corporate crowd back at my hotel, though. So,
Oh, well, that's good. That means more hours, more money.
hmm
Isn't that funny how that works?
oh yeah.
Um, yeah, it's been interesting week, but a good week. And as y'all can see, I'm not in studio tonight. When business calls, uh, we have to do what it do and make it do what it do. So, hope everybody had a great week. Hope everybody is good. Um, this month we've been just kind of doing hot topics. Um, and I'm getting these topics for hot topics this month from just the various conversations that I've been having with several of you offline. So I'm hoping that these hot topics are resonating with you and are what you guys are, that you guys can use them. So tonight we're talking about my grief. You might say, huh? Um, we're going to talk about grief tonight because I feel like there's this misconception over what grief is and how you're supposed to handle grief and how it all kind of works and what grief looks like or is supposed to look like. And so tonight we're just going to have a general conversation about grief. So what grief is, it's an acute emotional and psychological response to losing someone or something that's deeply important. Um, and what I want to say about that is, people have long since equated grief with only losing a loved one. And grief is not related to only losing a loved one. When you go through a divorce, you can experience grief. When you go through the loss of a job, you can experience grief. When you go through a significant relocation, you can experience grief. Um, Anything that is a major transition in which you feel like you lost something, you can experience grief. So just it's an emotional and psychological response to losing someone or something. And the reason it's resonating so deeply is because you feel deeply about that person or that something, that situation, that point in time. Just kind of remember as we go through this conversation tonight, um, that it's a natural, acute, emotional, and psychological response to losing something or someone. I'm going to start with the something or someone because maybe if we reframe it a little bit, people can get why it's not just related to something. I mean, someone. It grief occurs whenever you lose something or someone that is deeply important to you. Um, we all experience loss in some way, shape, form, or fashion. I am reminded I took a grief class after the loss of my daughter. And one of the things that resonated with me during that class was that grief comes in various forms. There are various things that can trigger that feeling of loss, that feeling of grief. And so, as we were discussing in class that day, there were people who were experiencing grief because of a lost job. They had been on their job for multiple years. The company downsized, and it was an unexpected downsizing. And so that person was left with this void after have been with that company for over 20 years, and didn't quite know how to, move on from that loss. That loss impacted them greatly because it was not just a loss of a job, but a loss of the camaraderie and the friendships and the relationships that have been developed during that 20 some years. Another person was speaking on the loss of, and this is going to sound kind of morbid, but they had lost a limb. They had been in a bad car accident and lost a limb. And even though they had opted for a prosthetic, it was the loss of the limb for them that triggered grief because they could not move past um, not having that arm anymore. Um, and so people don't even think about that as triggering a moment of grief. Losing a body part, a limb, or having a health scare. Another person talked about the overwhelming grief she felt when she was diagnosed with cancer. Even though she um, fought cancer and beat it, there was this overwhelming guilt and grief and sadness for her now changed life because of her diagnosis. So, again, just going back to grief is a natural, acute, emotional, and psychological response to losing someone or something deeply important. And then here's the other thing that I want you to consider as we're having this discussion tonight is what's deeply important to you may not be deeply important to someone else. So that's another indicator that grief changes for each person. Grief changes for each moment that is experienced. Grief changes as we experience life's ups and downs. So when you have that event that is a loss, that looks different for everybody. So what I want you to know about that is, there is no one size fit all grief or response to grief. It depends on what all is going on, and who is impacted by the grief. So, with that being said, your um, your response to grief is going to be different, based on your life experiences, based on the type of loss that you're grieving, based on just your overall outlook on loss and moving from loss. Some of the things you want to think about grief is grief shows up in different ways. Um, Grief shows up in different ways, and it can show up physically, it could show up emotionally. Um, and so grief has a whole body experience. Um, Grief has a whole body experience. And so what you need to think about that is, it shows up again, like I said, differently in everyone. So um, it can impact not just your feelings of sadness, but it can disrupt your life because you can be in shock, you can be in denial, you can have a profound yearning to fill the void that started from the loss. You can be angry, you can feel guilt, you can have anxiety. Those are your body's emotional responses to grief. Um, the other thing is grief can show up in a physical way. So, um, physically, what you would be observing during grief is fatigue, insomnia, um, headaches. Your immune system is compromised. You can have changes in your appetite. So, there are many ways grief can show up in your body. So remember, um, grief shows up emotionally and physically. Um, I'm taking notes for you guys, so you know I do that quite often every week. But again, emotionally and physically. So it involves your whole body. When you're thinking about how it is impacting um, you emotionally and physically, other things you want to think about um, is when that shows up, how can you deal with it? So, again, grief is not one size fits all. And as you can see in the way it shows up in your body, it can be a gamut of things. And so there are 5 stages to grief: um, denial, anger, bargaining, depression, and acceptance. So we'll just talk about that briefly. Those 5 stages of grief are kind of like what people attribute to the process of you accepting and kind of dealing with the loss that occurred. So, first, you're in denial. You can't believe this is happening. You can't believe the loss even occurred. Then, as you start sinking in that you've lost something that mattered so deeply to you, you get angry. And you're angry because, in your mind, this never should have happened. It shouldn't have been a loss, whether it's a person or a thing. It shouldn't have been a loss. So then you get angry because the loss even occurred. Then you kind of start bargaining with yourself, with God, with whomever you believe in, because you're kind of like, I mean, why did the loss happen? And if I had have done this, I could have done this better, and maybe the loss wouldn't have happened. And then kind of start second guessing the circumstances and the experiences and the actions that led to the loss. And then depression sits in because you're so deeply saddened and impacted, and your feelings are so overwhelmed that the depression comes in regarding the loss. And then what happens is you kind of get to a point where you accept the loss. You know it's happened. There's nothing you can do about it happening, and you come to terms with the someone or the something that you lost. Um, Funny thing about that, because people think just because you go through all of these stages that the grief just disappears. And what I want you to be reminded of is grief just, I mean, it doesn't just disappear because you go through these steps. And um, just because you go through these steps, hey T, what's going on, Miss Tam? Just because you go through these steps of grief doesn't mean the grief disappears. And the other thing about the five stages of grief is you might not even experience all five stages of grief. You might only experience one or two. And they don't have to come in this order of denial, anger, bargaining. Um, I can't spell, guys. I'm sorry. Bargaining, depression, and acceptance. They don't even have to come in that order. You could have these stages in any order, um, but it's still grief. So, what I want you to realize is that, again, grief is different for everybody. There is no one size fits all grief. Shout out to Tam, and I think that's my homie Pam. Hey, girl. Um, Glad to see y'all tonight. So grief looks different. Now, I didn't know this, and just in dealing with my own grief, um, I now understand that there's a difference between grieving and mourning. Grief is internal and is emotional. Mourning is outward, cultural, and a social expression of the loss. So people always say that, after you mourn, you should be done with your grief. No, that is not true. Mourning is external, grief is internal. Just because you mourn doesn't mean the grief disappears, and vice versa. Um, I like to think of grief as your individual internal dealing with loss. So, this whole notion that you have to go through five stages, you have to mourn, you have to do this. Yes, you mourn. Yes, you grieve. But again, mourning is an outward cultural, social expression of your loss. Grief is the internal emotional reaction because when you mourn, you're probably going to have an emotional reaction to the mourning process. So just remember again, grief is different for everyone. Um, Grief is different for everyone. Um, Let me say that again for the folks that didn't hear me in the back. Grief is different for everyone. Um, Nobody grieves the same way. There is no time frame, there is no right way, there is no wrong way. Grief is about how you manage your internal emotional reaction to the loss that you experience. Um, I'm going to give you an example. Um, my mother lost her mother in 2015. Then she lost my daughter, her granddaughter, in 2019. Then she lost her husband of 30 plus years in 2021. She outwardly mourned um, their losses, those losses. But every day, in some way, shape, or form, for probably about a few months after those losses, it was clear to me that she was still grieving. There are moments that she gets really sad right now. And again, she lost my grandmother now 11 years ago, her granddaughter, my daughter, um, thir- 13 years ago. Whew, Lord. Not 13, 2019. I can't do the math. That was 2019. So 9 years ago. Yeah, 9 years ago. Um, I think, y'all can do the math for me. I don't know. But anyway, and then her husband, my bonus dad, 5 years ago. There are moments that she gets deeply saddened by memories that she has of my grandmother, of me losing my daughter, and of her husband. Does that mean she's wrong because she still grieves? No. Does that mean there is a standard time period for her to grieve? No. I like to look at grief as it is something that comes in waves, it ebbs and flows. Once you get to the point where you are accepting of whatever loss you have, be it a loved one, a job, a sickness that you conquered, the loss of a limb, whatever loss you encountered, once you accept that, it doesn't mean the grief stops. Grief comes and goes in ebbs and flows. It comes when you least expect it sometimes. There are times that you may be wonderful and good and having great memories of whatever the loss was, or the thing or the person that you lost. Let me put it that way. But then there are moments where you think about that thing or that person and it just takes you out. Um, Speaking from personal experience, um, Father's Day for me has been hard since I lost my dad and my bonus dad. Um, and I sometimes I celebrate Father's Day, sometimes I don't. Sometimes I feel great about Father's Day, sometimes I don't. This past Father's Day, I was a basket case for 2 weeks. Father's Day came and I just was not myself. So, again, there's a difference in grieving and mourning. Mourning is outward, and external. Grief is your internal emotional reaction. Um, I guess that's all I want to say about that at this point. Um, how do we deal with grief? Um, I'm going to say you deal with grief the best way you know how to. Um, Again, there is no one size fits all method to dealing with grief. Um, because it is your internal response to your loss. It is your internal emotional, psychological response to loss. So there's not going to be this one size fits all um, way to handle grief. Um, what one person does may not be the same thing somebody else does. Um, So if we think of grief as an ebb and flow, if we think of grief as coming like a wave, if we think of grief that, there are days you'll be good versus days you might not be so good. The one thing I can tell you in dealing with grief is just acknowledge and express your pain. Acknowledge that you're not in a good place. Acknowledge that right now you're not good. Acknowledge the pain that you're feeling. Pain meaning I feel sad or anger or I just feel kind of blah. I'm feeling blue. I'm not feeling quite myself. And just acknowledge that and express that without judgment. It's okay for you um, to grieve. It's a natural part of life. It's a natural response to a loss. So, how are you going to deal with it? Um, acknowledge what you're feeling. Acknowledge and express the pain that you have. Acknowledge that I'm not okay. And it is okay for you not to be okay. Again, another personal story. So I had a conversation, um, just kind of impromptu. I had an impromptu conversation with um, a, a, a lady that I met in an airport, and a wonderful lady, very sweet, very nice. And we started talking about the loss of her granddaughter, who was 12 years old. And she ran me through, what happened and how, as a family, it was tough for she and her son and his wife and her other grandchild, who was the brother to the granddaughter that passed away. And in her telling me the story, it struck me that the reason she could talk to me about that is because she's at a point where she has accepted the loss. But even as she remembers her granddaughter, there are moments where she's still in pain. And so she got a little sad while we were talking, but there was no judgment. She just asked for a moment to kind of get back to herself. Um, and we continued our conversation. But what I took away from that conversation was what I just told you guys. Grief comes and goes in waves. It's not a straight line. Um, there are days that she's good. That during that conversation she had a moment. We acknowledged her sadness, and we still continue continued our conversation, which was a really eye-opening conversation for me, because it was just my reminder that, as believers, and she and I even talked about this, as believers, we grieve, but we don't grieve um, thinking that our loved ones are lost forever. We grieve because we are saddened at their loss. And so when you can hold on to that as a believer, um, and I can't speak for in people who are not believers, but as a believer, when you hold on to that and you hold on to the hope that you're going to see them again, and that they're in a better place, and the grief becomes a little easier to bear because you understand that you're grieving the memory and the place that they had in your life, or that thing had in your life. Because again, grief is just about loss. It could be of someone or something. Grief is about loss. So when you're dealing with your grief, just acknowledge and express the pain you have, and don't feel guilty and don't have judgment about it. Um, Acknowledge the pain. That does not mean the pain is going to automatically go away. But again, this is all a process, and it is a process um, that is unique and specific to you. The second thing you want to do is lean on your family, lean on your friends, your faith community. You're not here by yourself. Everyone has experienced loss. Everyone. There is not a person on this earth that has not lost something. There is not a person on this earth that has not lost someone. So again, grief is your response to the loss of someone or something that is important to you, that you have a deeply rooted connection with, someone or something. That is what generates your experience of grief. So in that, if you're going to deal with the grief, you also need to lean on that village, that community that you have, family, friends, your community of faith. Those people will be able to help you navigate through this time. Um, One of the reasons um, I believe that um, I was able to move forward after the loss of my daughter, after the loss of my two fathers. Um, I had a wonderful village around me. Um, I had people praying for me. I had people checking on me. I had people encouraging me to just, be still, feel the grief, go through the process. Um, I had other people just, making sure that I'm good. Um, those three losses were very tough for me. And anybody knows me, they know why those were so tough for me. But at the end of the day, it was the village that helped me get through it. Um, it was their prayers, it was their thoughts, it was their kindness, it was um, just their consideration. Um, they are part of the reason I was able to not just get stuck in a never ending cycle of grief. Um, and so they prayed me through, they walked me through, they talked me through, they hugged me through, they cried when I cried. So don't forget to lean on your village. Again, everyone has experienced loss of some type. When I was jobless, again, different kind of grief, same emotional response, but a different type of grief that for me than losing my loved ones. But even in that grief that I was feeling for the job loss, if it hadn't been for my village, I could have been super stuck. People giving me tips on, where to go for assistance if I needed anything, how to, network and find jobs. I have been without a job, what, three or four times in my life. And with all of those times came a really heavy level of grief. Um, but again, if it wasn't for that village, people gave me resources, people, sent my name to other people, people just surrounded me with everything I needed, pep talks, resume writing help, just everything I needed. So count on your village. Count on the people around you. Count on your church. Count on your social organizations. There are people in those organizations that can help you through this season that you're in regarding your grief. And finally, seek professional guidance from a therapist or a psychologist or some kind of counselor. There are grief counselors out here that specialize in helping people navigate through this season of grief. Um, there is nothing wrong with counseling. When I was in college was my first experience with a counselor, and I went to counseling at the request of my employer because I worked for the dean of students. And what happened was Adrian fell asleep and was asleep for over 72 hours. I just slept. And remember, I had told you guys that grief can present emotionally and physically. So I had emotional signs and I had physical signs. And so they suggested that I see a counselor through the EAP program. I went to the counselor only for her to tell me that I was grieving and depressed. And I looked at her and said, Black people don't get depressed. Ha ha. Yes, we do. Um, and so after talking to her, it was eye-opening for me because we walked through some things, and that's how I learned that I was in a deep depression because I was grieving a lot of things that had happened leading up to that time of me going to school. I had some significant losses of loved ones. I lost a relationship that meant the world to me at the time. I could not even see myself without that person. And so there was a whole lot of things going on during that time. And so Adrian just kept moving and shaking and moving and shaking and doing things and not dealing with the sadness I felt after all of those losses. Um, the sadness I felt after, that relationship was over, the sadness I felt for some other things that was going on. And it all showed up in Adrian fell asleep and went to sleep for 72 hours and nobody could wake me up. I just kind of slept for 72 hours. So yeah, you have to once you acknowledge and express your pain without judgment, um, and then count on your friends, family, and faith communities to help you. Count on your village. um, and then get some help. Um, there is nothing wrong with finding a counselor to get you over the hump when you're dealing with grief, especially because you may not even realize that you're grieving. You may not even know what to look for. So if you know something is a little off, or even if you know that you're experiencing grief and you're just stuck, um, seek some professional help. There are counselors that specialize in grief, and can walk you through different things, to help you navigate and give you some different tools, that you can use to not make the process easier, but just kind of help you again navigate what I call the season of grief that you're in. So the reason I titled this tonight is My Grief is because grief is different. Everybody experiences grief in a different way. There is no cookie cutter grief. There is no one size fits all way to handle grief or process grief or go through grief. It just depends on who you are, your life experiences, how you handle loss in general, how you respond to loss. Um, do you go at it alone, or do you rely on your village? Do you seek professional help? There is no one size fits all way to handle grief. Um, I don't want to just belabor this, but I think this is an important discussion because, again, I've had various conversations with people over the last couple of weeks, few weeks, about this very topic of grief. And I have to remind my people, my village, my friends and family, there is no one stop shop, or I mean, not one stop shop. There is no one stop cookie cutter way to handle grief. You have to give yourself the permission to walk through your grief journey the way you need to walk through your grief journey. Like I just told you, I've experienced many kinds of losses. Um, and in particular, there are moments I'm good and there are moments I'm not so good. But the difference is I do not beat myself up because I'm in a low moment. Um, it's a natural part of life. And so we have to move away from this notion that we can't be sad. We have to move away from this notion that, you know, just because Sally over here is okay after 2 days doesn't mean I have to be okay after 2 days. And Sally over here, she lost her mom or her dad or her kid or her job or she went through a sickness too. And but just because she's okay after 2 days or 3 days or 2 months or 1 month or 20 minutes, doesn't mean I have to be okay in that time frame. So give yourselves permission to experience grief and deal with grief the way that fits for you. Let me make sure there are no questions. I've been flipping through um, both StreamYard and Instagram today to handle all the comments and stuff, but just give yourself permission to experience grief the way you need to experience grief. Um, and don't forget, if you're stuck, um, seek professional help. That's all I have for y'all tonight. Um, if y'all have any other questions or need some resources, hit me up. You know how to reach us. Um, and we'll see y'all next week. Peace.